All right, so Ring 4 just concluded, and it was a very, I'd say, interesting night to say the least. I think the biggest thing that happened that night was the Abdullah Mason Sam Noakes fight. That was an amazing fight. I honestly had it pretty close. I mean, I think I gave the edge to Mason mostly, but it was a very close fight, very entertaining fight. I'd be happy if they put it back, maybe not immediately, but I wouldn't be upset if they maybe had it go on in the future. If Noakes gets a title, maybe they go for a unification. That'd be really cool. The rest of the night, it was pretty mixed depending on who you ask. I think we can all agree the Haney-Norman fight was not necessarily the greatest halfway through because of the constant glitching, but that'll be saved for a different video potentially. Bam did his thing, of course. But what I want to focus on specifically is Abdullah Mason. Where does he go from here? Because 130 to 140, which I know he's not fighting at 130, but fighters from 130 can of course move up to 135. And from this range, there's a lot of very talented fighters, and I'm very curious to see where he's going to go. I think he has a lot of great options that he can fight. And so, taking inspiration from my good friend DV, which by the way, subscribe to him, very amazing content creator, definitely recommend watching his videos. But he gave me full permission to upload a video about this for Abdullah Mason. I asked him and he said he's not going to make one for this, so why not make one myself? So I'm going to go over a bunch of guys and just talk about where I think they stack up against Abdullah Mason. The first person to mention is Alberto Puello, which Puello, I think I'm going to give him close fight. Here's why. I think Puello, he can be very consistent when you are not pushing the action. Man, he can really work behind that jab. He can do some great combinations and check hooks. Like, he can be very deadly. Now, I don't think he's necessarily the greatest puncher. Like, he's not going to be knocking you out, but he can be very lethal in timing, and he can stop you in your tracks. He can hit you a lot. And I think his consistency is something that a lot of fighters have issues with. The only person, like even when we talk about like Matias, which Matias is his Puello's only loss, you could arguably make the case Puello beat Matias. I think I even had Puello up around, but either way, that fight was close and it was a great fight as well. So when just thinking about that and in retrospective of where Mason is with his skill set, I'm a little concerned that he wouldn't be able to necessarily find it. But at the same time, what he just did against Sam Noakes, where he could push Sam Noakes backwards, and Puello isn't honestly the greatest on the back foot. Like when Matias had him against the ropes, he would just kind of start throwing a little bit more of haymakers, and he wasn't necessarily as consistent, ironically. So I would put him in close fight if Mason can get him down there. I think if Mason can get him on the back foot, can get him on the ropes, I think Mason has the skills to get him in Puello in a pretty bad situation. I don't know if I would put him in 75-25. I think that's a little too generous, but I also don't think it's a decent chance. I think Puello, who's a little bit bigger, he is, again, very consistent. I think close fight makes sense. Baranchyk, though, Dennis Baranchyk, I'm putting him back. And no, I don't think his skills are that great. He's kind of someone who's living off the highs of the Olympics, but also the Emmanuel Navarrete fight, which, I mean, it was a good fight, don't get me wrong, and I thought he beat Navarrete pretty convincingly, but since then he's not looked good at all. I think he's only had that Keyshawn fight, and he got destroyed against Keyshawn. That wasn't at all like close or competitive, and there's really nothing similar to how Mason and Navarrete fight. Like the closer comparison would be Keyshawn, and Keyshawn pieced him up. Like Baranchyk, he looked pretty bad against Keyshawn. He just got pieced up consistently. The inside work is going to get to him, and especially because I'm not a big fan of Baranchyk's defense. It's like this, I wouldn't say like a hybrid, but it's like this weird mixture of like a guard meets like body posturing. And it just doesn't necessarily work, and he just gets caught to the body quite a bit. And Mason has some great work to the body that we just saw against Noakes. So I'm not very convinced that Barancyk's really going to do anything good. His only way is if Mason decides to stand toe-to-toe with him, and Barichek lands some great shots. That's about it. Nunes, however, this one's a little tougher. I think I'm going to put this in 75-25, and the will win. My only reasoning is because Sam Noakes did give Mason some problems. Even if I think it was like 8-4 for Mason, 7-5. No, I'm pretty sure it was 8-4 for Mason. Even if I had it like pretty decently wide, it's still like you can see where there is some areas that Mason can work on, and where some areas that you can capitalize to beat him right now. And which I don't think is necessarily a problem. Again, he's very young. We can see him improve. It's not like this is the end-all be-all of his career right now. But if he were to fight Nunes right now, my biggest issue is, can he stop the progression of Nunes? Nunes hits very hard. Maybe you can say he doesn't necessarily... for his weight, I think Nunes hits harder than Noakes does. Maybe you can say Noakes hits harder because, of course, he's in a bigger weight class. But if Nunes comes with any sort of firepower that he has at 130, it's going to be a pretty long night for Mason. I'm not going to lie. I do think Mason has some ability to create range, to maintain the range. He can slow Nunes down. And we've seen Nunes get caught with counters against Diaz in his most recent fight. So I'm not necessarily... There's some wiggle room, but my biggest thing is like the main way that Nunes operates forward, I just don't necessarily see Mason slowing him down, especially because initially Nunes can get operated pretty fast. It took Mason a bit to get going, so I think you can have Mason either at the top of 50-50, 75-25. I'm currently going to move him, or I'm currently going to put him at 75-25. He could move down though. Navarrete, I'm going to put Navarrete in decent chance. I think Navarrete isn't really consistent behind the jab. We've seen him have some pretty shaky performances, especially his most latest one against Suarez. That was not the greatest fight by any means. He had some pretty shaky moments, and I think Mason can just sit there, capitalize, jab him to death, and there's not really much Navarrete can do unless he can just keep it like this moving forward and creating distance game, or breaking down the distance game. That's pretty much his only means that he can do to win. So because of that, I'm going to keep him at 75-25. So when we talk about Schofield, I'm going to put him no. You know, I know in the future maybe we could be talking about Schofield very highly. I just have so many questions around him because he's not faced a single good dude, maybe other than Tevin Farmer. And we'll get to Tevin Farmer here in a minute. But in his most biggest fights that he was about to have, you know, he gets called out sick. He's not taking them. And so some people have been questioning, like, okay, is he even like that level to begin with? Because, you know, he's just looking for more preparation. I don't know. His career right now is very stagnant. You know, we've seen guys like Shushu coming up, and he's about to fight for a world title, at least presumably so. Abdullah Mason just got his world title after Keyshawn. Keyshawn, I guess you could say, is in like the same age range. He got in a title right beforehand. So the people that he's supposed to be in the same age range of and getting titles with, he's not really progressing as farly. And it's a little concerning that he's either getting injured or he's sick right before these big fights. And the people who he's faced, I don't think are that great, other than Tevin Farmer, in which I don't think a Tevin Farmer, especially one if you say like, oh, he's pretty old, and his Williams Zepeda fights, you can kind of put a knock against him. So I just don't think what we've seen from Schofield so far makes him have anything really competitive with Mason, unless Mason's maybe having an off night or something. But maybe in the future we'll see Schofield have a much better, I guess, degree of impact in his fights and fight better people. Gary Russell. Now this is pretty interesting because Gary Russell, you know, of course this isn't a prime Gary Russell, but Gary Russell still has a lot of elements that makes him a phenomenal fighter still. He's still fast. He's still very defensively sound. He can still catch you off guard. What makes it a little weird though is he's not necessarily faced the greatest, but I know he's trying to get into contention for titles, and he's slowly gotten back since his return. I think I'm currently going to give it a decent chance above Navarrete, because he does seem to be faster than Mason. Of course, in his prime, he was way faster. Don't get that wrong. Like Gary Russell in his prime was incredibly fast. But currently, and with, being in an older age, of course, he does seem to be a little bit slower. Still very fast though, and I still think he's faster than Mason. He wasn't ever like the craziest power puncher. He had some pop at featherweight. At lightweight, you can still see that he hits pretty hard, but he's not like the craziest puncher either, and he hits pretty notably weaker than when he was at featherweight. So because of that, I think there isn't as much success he's gonna have, just because, again, the jab he's not gonna be winning the jab contest with Mason. I think defensively Mason is a little bit better, and I think his counters specifically stand out when it comes to that, and posturing as well. But I think if we see Russell do pretty well against, say, someone like an Andy Cruz, for example. Oh, speaking of which, I just realized Andy Cruz is not on here. I can actually quickly add him. Andy Cruz. Where did bro go? There he is, Andy Cruz. All right, we'll add Andy Cruz. Okay. Actually, I'll put him right here since he's alphabetically first. Like I was saying though, like if he did well against Andy Cruz or something, I think that would speak volumes, because Andy Cruz is a pretty good defensive fighter, and I think that would kind of give us a better idea of how Mason would be, or how Russell would tackle Mason in that fight. But until we see something like more of like that top level from Gary Russell, it's going to be a little hard for me to say that, like, okay, he is of this tier right now, when we just haven't seen it. So I'm a little skeptical right now, but he could easily prove me wrong, and he could easily be higher on this list. Andy Cruz now, this is a little weird because he had that like one mediocre performance on the Terrence Crawford undercard, but he's looked pretty solid since, I won't lie, and he's always defensively pretty good. He doesn't have the craziest power, and when I'm thinking about it, I just don't, he's not going to be really winning in a firefight. What I'm really curious about is, can he catch Mason? And when I think about it, I don't think he can really catch Mason. Mason's a little bit faster, he postures better, has a better guard, especially with like the shoulder and elbows and usage of that. I think Andy Cruz is going to be very hard to hit, don't get me wrong, but I don't think he's going to be like tagging Mason very much. That isn't necessarily a specialty, and I definitely think, yeah, I just don't necessarily see it like that. I think he has a better chance against Navarrete. Navarrete doesn't necessarily have the skill set unless it's like a very hyper-specific circumstance. I think Cruz is a little bit more balanced, but this isn't really the best fight because Mason's also very defensively responsible. Mason's way better on offense, especially with punching variety. And Cruz, it's not like he's hitting the hardest, so it's not like he's like this very defensively oriented fighter who has like a lot of pop. So because of that, I'm going to put Cruz at decent chance right now. GR, I think I'm going to put him at 90. We'll definitely win. That's just because the volume's insane. I don't think, yeah, Mason's defensively good. The volume that Gary Antoine Russell, G-A-R, that is hard to say, but that Antoine Russell has is crazy. He's also like defensively responsible as well, especially with the body movement and the footwork. I think he is going to give Mason a lot of problems if they did fight, especially the fact that Russell is, obviously a weight class higher. And I could see Russell putting on quite a bit of damage to Mason, to be honest. I don't think neither are going to be murdering each other, but at the same time, I have a little bit more faith in Gary's power than Mason's power, just because who they faced and how much damage they put on in the fight. Like what he did to Rayo was pretty crazy. He was piecing Rayo up. There was a few times where Rayo looked like he may be going or it may get stopped, but like we just haven't really seen that against like who the top level that Mason has faced. Granted, it's only been Noakes, and Noakes might have a granite chin, to be fair, but currently I'm a little bit more confident in Gary's power. His defensive ability is also great, and the volume is just something that we've not seen Mason face so far. So just based off what we've seen and what we haven't seen, again, I would put Gary Antoine Russell at the top, and he would definitely win currently. Kimbozo, he's going to get no. None of his fights as of late have been impressive. He's lost pretty much every seemingly, like, I think, yeah, every championship fight he's lost, other than Teofimo way back in 2021. So nothing in his career has really given him anything. He looked awful against Richard, or against Hitchens. Like that was awful. So no, nothing really. Gervonta Davis is interesting though. So part of me wants to put it in close fight because we have seen Gervonta look pretty bad recently. I would say pretty bad. I think that's a fair statement. I think most people now, even if they initially gave it to Tank, I think they're more so giving it to Roach now. Like it's pretty definitive that Roach has not looked the greatest, or sorry, that Roach made Tank not look the greatest. And so when I look at that fight, it isn't really the best style matchup for Tank, but at the same time, there is some pretty glaring openings that Mason has that we saw against Noakes, and I feel like Tank can capitalize on that. So part of me wants to know, like, okay, like who's going to win? Obviously the jabbing battle, Mason is going to be controlling the distance, but a part of me does think, okay, if he's given the same opportunities that Noakes occasionally had, can Gervonta capitalize on it and land a crazy punch? So part of me thinks that maybe Tank can capitalize on what Sam Noakes had in his fight and his ability to actually like touch up on the body and get some good clean shots on Mason. And if Tank can capitalize on it that Noakes was able to find occasionally, I do think Tank has a lot of potential to potentially like finish the fight or at least land some very damaging shots. But at the same time, I also really struggle to see how Tank is going to be consistently winning that fight, especially because Roach's jab like really did work Tank, and it set up some great shots against Tank. When you don't give, like, even though I wouldn't say like Roach was constantly throwing out the jab, he did have a really ethical jab that did slow the progress of Tank and give Tank not a lot to work with. So if Mason can replicate that strategy, it's going to be a very horrible night for Tank. I don't think he wins in that case. But again, there is some circumstance where I do think Tank can win. Now, Isaac Cruz, I'm going to put in... He's kind of a worse Navarrete. I kind of want to put him right here in no, to be fair. My current reasoning is just because, like, let's just think about, like, who he's faced at, like, the top levels of 135 and 140. He did well against Tank, but, again, Tank is, like, he's a come-forward fighter, or Cruz is a come-forward fighter. Tank doesn't necessarily have the best skill set for, like, a big, bulky guy that he can't just stop. And then he fought Rayo and Raleigh. You know, he did good against Raleigh, but then he looked pretty horrible against Rayo, who just kind of really outworked him the whole fight, and Cruz had a hard time dealing with the jab and the distance reach. And who was the fight after that? That's gonna bother me. He fought someone right after that, and he looked solid, but he didn't look like crazy. Just based off what we've seen, like I just don't think necessarily the skill sets match that well. And based off just like, I don't even think he could really, like, I'm sure he could damage Mason, and it's not like Mason was like 100% like not hit at all in that fight. There was times where, like, you know, he looked like he could maybe like, I don't want to say take a knee, but like he looked a little damaged, right? Other than that, like, headbutt, but outside of that headbutt, he looked like he could be damaged, and he was damaged like a few times. Maybe Cruz can capitalize on that, but other than that, though, there isn't really anything to his game. Like, he really isn't that great against rangy fighters. He looked horrible against Rayo. Then like Tank, he had a really bad time against counter strikes against Tank, and his really only big time win was really against Raleigh. And Raleigh fights nothing like how Mason does. So I just don't really see it. I think the movement and distance is really going to give Cruz a lot of work. So I'm just going to put Cruz at the bottom. Rayo, I'm going to put Rayo at like the bottom, a decent chance. To be fair, I think like he's bigger. I think he's like I believe he's like an inch or two taller. But that's about it though. Is, you know, maybe he has a longer reach and he's taller. He fights as a bigger weight class, of course. But other than that, like he's kind of just a worse Mason in every regard. Worse jab, worse footwork, worse defensive ability, posturing, everything like that. So I think he just does everything worse, and so I think he just loses. His only means that gets him in a better situation than these four in the no tier is that he fights at a higher weight class, so maybe that gives him an advantage of like power, maybe he can sneak something in, but other than that, there's nothing convincing about Rayo's game that I think is going to beat Mason. Keyshawn's a little weird. I'm going to put Keyshawn in 50-50. They both share a lot of similar circumstances, or sorry, similar skill sets. That's what I meant to say. They both share a lot of similar skill sets, and because of that, I could see this being a 50-50 fight. I think they're both defensively responsible. I think they both have pretty good counters. I think Mason is a little bit better with his defensive posturing and body movement than Keyshawn. I think Keyshawn looks a little too to focus on the counters a bit too much, at least by comparison, because I think the skill set is pretty negligent. But overall, because they do share quite a bit, and I think maybe you can say Keyshawn hits harder, I think that's a fair statement. I would put Keyshawn at 50-50. I think it is a pretty close fight, and I would give both the opportunity to win. Like, they would both be reasonably favorites in my opinion. And I could see that going either way. So I'm not upset if someone had Keyshawn beating him, and I wouldn't be upset if someone had Mason beating Keyshawn. Roach, I'm also going to put at 50-50. A lot of people are going to be surprised and maybe like, oh, you know, Roach should be and will win. Will definitely win based off his tank performance. Again, we have to see the consistency of it. Some people think it's a fluke. I don't think it's a fluke. I think he's been consistently great at 130, other than like maybe Jamal Herring. But even then, Jamal Herring isn't even like a bad fighter. But he's been pretty good up to this point, and he looked great against Tank. So maybe he's turned over a new leaf. Maybe it's a fluke to some people. But either way, it's not like his skill set is necessarily like something that's going to be super, like, it's not necessarily as good as what Tank's is in this set. Like, yeah, I don't think he's necessarily going to be as bad as what Tank potentially will be based off how Tank looked against Roach with the, you know, the jab, the lack of him giving him offense to work with. But that's not like Mason has an issue with that. And so like the same benefits and struggles in that fight between Tank and Roach, it's not like Mason has a skill set that's like similar in that regard. There is a better jab from like obviously Tank didn't use a jab against Roach, so there's something that I have to factor that in now that's very different than what Roach was having experience in that fight. And overall, I'm going to be curious to see just like how Roach would do with that, and I think Roach would handle the power very well. I don't think, like, just based off like the shots he was taking, I don't think Roach is going to be getting dropped or anything. Maybe if we think Mason's hitting harder and Sam Noakes is like the granite chin fighter that some Brits think he is, but I think outside of that, no one's thinking he's like a granite chin. But who knows, maybe Mason is hitting harder than Tank. Currently, it's very hard to say that right now, but it would just be pretty interesting to see like how that interaction works, because it's not like Tank is very similar to Mason, and I'm very curious to see if Roach would carry that same success. But I do think that counters that Roach has are going to be very comparable, if not maybe a little bit better than what Mason is used to, and maybe even better than his own counters. And I'm curious to see what's going to happen if he's just getting timed and tagged consistently, and especially how that jab's going to work. Are they just going to kind of out jab each other? Can Mason really like figure out the jab counter strategy that Roach was using? You know, I'll be very curious to see how that works. So I do think it is a close fight. I wouldn't be upset if either one, or if someone had the favorite over the other, but I could see it go either way. Paro, I don't think Paro has like the greatest game. I'm going to put him right above Valenzuela. I think he's more consistent than Valenzuela, but he's not like the craziest puncher. He's just kind of like a worse Puello, if I'm being honest. He's a worse, I'll probably say he's just kind of like a worse Puello. He's got a jab. It's cool. He's got some movement. I think the movement's pretty good, but it's not like Mason struggles with movement, and it's not like Mason doesn't have any movement himself. His defense is worse. And again, it's not like he has power to really compensate for this, and his punching variety can be pretty limited, so I think he's just decent chance. more consistent in the balance weightless, that's why he goes higher, but that's about it. Oshaki Foster, this I would put right above Navarrete. I think he has a better chance just because he has more punching variety. He can close the distance arguably a bit better, especially with the overhand shots. I think with the overhand shots, he's way better than Navarrete can be. But other than that, though, he kind of struggles in the same regard. He doesn't necessarily do the greatest against fighters that move a lot. And, I mean, like, Ray Vargas did give him troubles. You know, I thought he beat Ray Vargas, of course. But Ray Vargas did give him some trouble sometimes. And he would get caught by quite a bit. And I think Mason's going to do way better than what Ray Vargas did. So, just by comparison, I am going to put Oshaki Foster here, just given what we've seen. Maybe if Oshaki Foster, you know, he was really good against, like, Stephen Fulton, which we'll get to Stephen Fulton here in a minute. Maybe we can, you know, what I would say they have a lot of similar skill sets as well, or similar individual skills. So maybe we can see like how that interaction works to base off Mason and Foster. But other than that, though, I think just based off what we've seen, I'd like Mason's chances a lot more. Raymond Ford, kind of in a similar situation, but I kind of like him a little bit better. I'm not gonna lie. I'm gonna put him right above Cruz. My biggest thing is I think he hits a little bit better than Foster, and I think his defense is also a bit better. And so just very similar situation to some degree. I don't think his offense is as consistent, but I think he's defensively more responsible, and I think he's got a little bit more pop. So I am gonna put him in decent chance right now. Mertalia, I'm gonna put right above Paro. Actually, maybe, I don't know. I think he goes somewhere in here. I'm not very convinced on Mertalia. I actually think he's gonna lose his next fight against Cruz, assuming that fight. I'm pretty sure that fight was announced. His offensive game is just very limited, especially because he can kind of just be like single shot sporadic, or sometimes he could just start like just throwing like really goofy combinations. Not the biggest fan of his punching variety and ability to mix it up. His defense, I'm also just not like very big on. I think he just gets pieced up a bit too much, and he's just not super consistent on that end. I think Mason does the same thing, so I'm gonna put him right here. I think he maybe has a chance if he can just kind of like consistently find that angle to work with and consistently just touch Mason up. But other than that, I don't think he does well. Now Richardson Hitchens. Part of me wants to put him in close fight, but I also want to put him at like the top of decent chance. And I'm only debating it because Hitchens, of course, he doesn't hit hard, but he can be kind of defensively, I shouldn't say kind of, he can be defensively responsible and annoying to hit. So I'm questioning it, but I do think I want to put him here just because I don't see him putting much damage on Mason. Especially because like how he took Cambozo out, it just wasn't at all convincing. Like, we've seen way better stoppages from guys that face Cambozo. So it's just, I can see him having some great success because, again, he works behind the jab. He can find the combination and single shots really well. And he can be very elusive. He can be annoying to hit. Mason, I could see him honestly just outworking him. That's kind of where I stand. When I see this fight, he's going to be out jabbing him. He's going to be fighting the inside. He's going to be finding the inside shots. And he's going to be landing shots upstairs. I just see Mason getting picked apart. But the only reason I think he's just in decent chance is just because, again, the jab, and he can be very hard to hit. I think that's really the only reason why he's that high. And if he didn't have it, he'd honestly be lower. But maybe his skill set gets him into a higher tier. But other than that, though, I think he just goes here. Sam Noakes, I think I have to put him in decent chance. Maybe at the top because I think he did the best someone could against Mason of his skill set. Maybe other than like Eduardo Nunes that we mentioned earlier, but he hits pretty hard, or at least he seems to hit pretty hard. And he's on it, and like, again, the push forward aggression that he has, maybe you can say some of that was because, or his only success was because Mason decided to stay in front of him and he wasn't always jabbing or standing behind the jab. But either way, you know, he found some great opportunities. I don't think he would win a fight if they had a rematch, but I think he could replicate maybe the same success, and maybe he can get a knockout win. Though again, it didn't really ever seem like he was going to drop Mason. Maybe Mason was only hurt like 1 or 2 times. So I don't really think he would win by stoppage. His best chance would just be keep finding the same success over a 12-round duration and win a decision. But I don't think that's very likely. And unless you like hyper scored it for Mason, and you thought like some of those close rounds were all Mason, that's really the only way you thought it was like a draw or a Mason victory. I think pretty much everyone else had it Mason, or sorry, when I said Mason victory, I meant to say a Noakes victory. But I think everyone else had it for Mason than Noakes, just because those close rounds, Mason seemed to be doing a lot more, especially defensively. He was a lot harder to hit. And the come forward front guard, I don't think really works that well against what Mason was trying to do. And Mason was constantly touching up the body and landing the uppercut. So again, I think it's a decent chance. Maybe he can replicate the same success and potentially win. Very unlikely though. So I think I'm going to put him in decent chance. Shakur Stevenson, I'm going to put in will win. I just currently, based off what we've seen, I just don't think the jab is really going to be working against what Shakur is capable of. Nothing, I don't think we've seen really anyone really have like this great jab against Shakur, but even then, it's not like that's really a weakness against Shakur, and it's more so like infighting heavy puncher. That's more so what's going to be what it is. And I don't think Mason's infighting is that great to where it's going to give Shakur a lot of problems. And there is some openings that Mason can sometimes have. Again, he can work on it because he's still pretty young. But I definitely see Shakur finding those and just timing him and countering him. I think he's going to be even trickier to hit than what I said for Hitchens or Tank or Roach for that matter. Maybe even Keyshawn if you want to throw him in there. So just because of that, he's going to be very tricky to hit. He's going to be finding those times. And he's going to be finding those times to hit Mason. And it's not like Mason has the best game for Shakur. So because of that, I'm going to put Shakur at the very highest. I just think it's going to be very one-sided, just like all of other Shakur's fights. Now, when we talk about Fulton, I'm going to put him in decent chance. Again, that's assuming he looks good against O'Shaquie Foster, which I do think he's a pretty good chance to beat Foster, but I don't think it's like the craziest. I'm actually going to put him right here. I think he is a better skill set than the others, but it's kind of like Mason does a lot better than what Fulton does. Other than speed, I think Fulton is a faster fighter, but defensively, I think Fulton, other than maybe like head and body movement, maybe some foot movement, I don't think he's better. And so it's just kind of like, he's going to be jabbing more than Fulton. He's going to be he's going to be hitting his rhythm more, hitting Fulton more. He's also going to be tricky to hit. It's not like Fulton is going to be like consistently landing the best shots, right? Like who Brandon Figueroa was, who Angelo Leo is not at all how Mason fights. So I just don't see the same success being replicated, especially because Mason he's bigger than Fulton and he does a lot of what Fulton does, but I think he hits harder. So because of that, I think Fulton's not going to have that great of success. Yeah, I would say his only big chance is like that he just keeps the distance and he makes this a tough fight for Mason. I think that's really like his best chance. Matias, I'm going to put Matias and will win. I don't think it's as convincing. No. I think it's more convincing, actually. Biggest thing is Matias is bigger. He's stronger. He's going to be finding his shots. He always finds his shots. Pollo had a really tough time. Even if you think Pollo won, Pollo really did have a tough time. Paro had success, though. So that is kind of what makes me think maybe you should put Matias lower. Paro did have success, but the thing is, I think Paro's a little bit bigger than Mason. And I'm a little just concerned if, like, what Noakes could do, I feel like Matias could do. And I feel like Matias could be hitting those heavy shots and just eventually drop Mason. So I'm not very confident. You could put Mason in a close fight, or you could put Matias in a close fight if you think Mason can replicate what Paro did to a higher degree. But at the same time, just based off what we saw with Noakes, I just don't think that Matias is going to have as much issue, especially because he's used to fighting, like, example, not that Puello is exactly like Mason, by no means are they exactly the same, but Matias had a lot of success against Puello. Puello really did struggle to keep that distance, and those shots couldn't keep Matias off of him. So because of that, I do think Matias would win. Yeah, I would say yeah. I think 75-25 is fair. Teofimo, I think Teofimo maybe in close fight. I think Teofimo does the worst out of the current champs at 140. Wait, who's the IBF? Oh, Hitchens. No, never mind. No, I think Teofimo does almost the worst out of anyone at 140. His best chance is that, he has movement. He can pop a move. Maybe he gives Mason some struggle. But at the same time, it's not like Teofimo's hitting nearly as hard as what he was doing at 135. And I just don't necessarily see the same success, especially because of how he's looked recently. I mean, I think the Barboza fight was a pretty good performance. Outside of that, though, he's looked pretty, like, not that great. So I do think he could get outworked by the jab, but I could also see the movement and Teofimo just finding his shots and rhythm. I could also see that. So again, it's kind of like one of those 50-50 fights I could see going either way. I think I slight more towards Mason, though, in that encounter. Tevin Farmer, I'm going to put no. Simply put, I think, A, by this time, he's just older. B, I think just the volume combination punching style, he's just going to get tagged. Even, I know Farmer had some good defense. I don't think that defense is necessarily there right now. And I also just don't... I mean, based off what happened with him and Schofield, it's not like the greatest look. He can be pieced up, clearly. And so it's just not like the greatest look for him right now. Of course, he's older, and I just don't think, even if this was his prime, he could give Mason some trouble, no doubt. But it's not like he was as hard hitting. It's not like he was Tank with his, he has some pretty good defenses, or Keyshawn's another good one. But it's not like he's Tank or Keyshawn where has hard hitting shots and he's very elusive or has like really, really good defense. So because of that, I just don't think Tevin Farmer would really even win in his prime, if I'm being honest. But maybe he'd have a better chance. I think maybe like top of decent chance maybe. Currently though, I just think he's past it. Of course he's older now, and he just didn't look that great against Schofield. So because of that, I'm going to put him in no. Lastly, we have Zepeda. Zepeda is someone where he's honestly just a way worse Gary Antoine Russell. I really just don't see Zepeda winning. Like, yeah, he has the volume, does not hit hard though, and he could be exposed to many shots. He's gotten countered by Tevin Farmer and by Shakur. I just see Mason having a field day with the counters, and it's not like the volume shots are going to be the most punishing ever, right? Maybe if he lands like 50 consecutively, then yeah, but other than that though, I don't think it's like the craziest to say that like Mason would win. So I'm gonna put him in probably right here. I don't think he has a good game by any stretch. I think he I think he's still a good fighter, but again, just like the matchup is not at all in Zepeda's favor. He just has volume. His defense is whatever. I mean, of course he's a pressure fighter, but the thing is, Mason excels when it's pressure fighters. You saw the openings that he was getting, especially throughout his career. He's gotten some fantastic openings, and he can land some devastating shots. And I think that Zepeda is just going to get countered, and he's going to get tagged consistently, especially with the movement, the great defensive work. So I just think it's a no bueno for that fight. Yeah, overall, I think it's, I like Mason's chances. I think he has a lot of great fights right now. And as you can see, I think he beats quite a bit of people. I will be curious to see how some of these guys, like Andy Cruz, if they can beat Murtalia. And I do think like maybe they have a Sam Noakes rematch in the future. Maybe this could look different. Gary Russell Jr., maybe that looks a little bit different if he fights maybe an Andy Cruz, or he goes on to beat like a Schofield maybe, or just someone very someone more relevant. I think that's a better way to put it. Overall though, I do like where he stands, and I'm very curious to see where he's going to go from here, and I wish him the best luck. Maybe he does, let me reword that, and I hope he does But yeah, overall, I do think he's going to have, I think he has a lot of opportunities, and I think he could do very well. I do think, just based off what we've seen so far, I think he could have a very successful career. He has a lot of great opponents he can face, come out, and, if he fights quite a bit of these people, I think we could be viewing him very highly in a few years. So, very excited to see that. I thought Ring 4 overall was very good, other than, I would say, like half of the Norman Haney fight. Again, that was a very boring fight. And shout out to Benavidez, who absolutely destroyed Yard. No one saw that. People were now joking that maybe Yard and Haney, they did some like soul transfer, and that's how Haney was able to knock down Norman or something. But yeah, overall though, I think a pretty solid card. A little disappointing towards the middle. Shout out Bam for absolutely destroying Martinez. And yeah, overall, I think that's going to do it, guys. Maybe I might make another one in the future. I think I've talked to EV before about making a collab video in one of these structures. So yeah, very possible we could be seeing more of this on my channel, or definitely potentially his channel as well. So anyways, guys, thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you all later.